still in full force and effect, and therefore the board is currently prohibited by law from requiring mask mandates in schools. So my recommendation continues to be that you follow the law.
Thank you, Bill. Does anybody have any questions or anything else you want to talk about on that? Okay. So, Bryce, I apologize. Now, it's a good time for an update.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Tom Sharp and Jay Ellis previously served on the Pandemic Response Committee. Due to Tom's role as board president, no longer has the capacity for that, so I've been appointed in his stead. We had our first meeting last Friday. We talked about changes to the current back to school safety plan. We did make a couple of changes. The current plan is on our website, and for those of you that want to review it, you can quickly go to the last page and it will show you the changes that were made. Just to summarize briefly, most of the changes dealt with our re-entry protocol. If a student has tested positive for COVID, what the requirements are to re-enter into the school, and that's based on current TEA guidelines. And so that, I would say that was the primary change. We did talk about, different adverbs like strongly or expect, and we determined not to make any changes to the language of the protocol with regard to that last Friday. We also, Jay, John DeLander and I have been appointed as the 3 individuals who will select physicians that will advise the Pandemic Response Committee. Jay, John, and I met on Thursday regarding that, and we also met on Friday regarding that. So, Jay, I don't know if you have anything you want to add, but that's the update from my perspective.
Thank you, Bryce. It's a good update. Did you have a question, Stacey? It's an accurate update. I do think it's important to look at the language of that back to school plan. It's something that we have not had any dissension from, and that's what our goals are as a school district and as a pandemic response committee. And I think it's worth reminding, because we're in a community that feels really divided right now, but the more we look to what our school district is doing, and the more we look at what that committee is doing, and when we look at what the leaders, both in the administration and on the school board, are doing, is actually trying to bring everybody together and try to figure out ways to accomplish common goals. And so I want to share with the board again what those, and the administration and the audience and our community, what those goals are. First is the mission of our school district, and that is that we are committed to providing the highest quality education to all students regardless of circumstance. And I'm reading that directly from the back to school plan. And second, that's our mission. But second is our responsibility, and it's at a bullet point right either before or after that one, and it says, the health and safety of our students, staff, families, and our community is our top priority. Every decision made will take into consideration the latest guidance and direction from local, state, and federal authorities. And so what I want to remind those who maybe aren't in those meetings, we're all on the same team here. We're trying to figure out how we can keep our kids in the schools. That's one thing. I didn't hear one person today. I haven't gotten one email today from someone that says we want our kids out of the schools. We want our kids in the school buildings. And so we've got that in common. We also have in common that we want our kids to be safe and healthy, and we want the adults in those school buildings to be safe and healthy. That's what we have in common. Now some of us differ on how we accomplish that, but I just want to remind the community and our board that what unites us here is a lot greater than what divides us, even though it doesn't feel that way sometimes. And so what I want to remind and also bring attention to that was changed in the back to school plan is there is a direct reference to that executive order that Bill Banowski reminded us did you have?
I was just going to say, Tammy, would you bring up what Jay's, I see you've got what you got in front of you, and I know we do have a slide of that. That is the governor's executive
Maybe
order.
wait until I introduce it, but that would be helpful, thank you. What we've added to the back to school plan is language that encourages our community to please follow the full guidance and leadership of our governor. Please follow everything that the governor is recommending us to do, because to pick and choose parts of what the governor's executive order says doesn't defer to his leadership or his authority. So now, Tammy, if you wouldn't mind showing the excerpt from Executive Order 38 that applies to our and now to schools statewide. It reads, and I'll just read the whole thing. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues, Texans are strongly encouraged as a matter of personal responsibility to consistently follow good hygiene, social distancing, and other mitigation practices. Governor Abbott goes on to say, to ensure the ability of Texans to preserve livelihoods while protecting lives, in areas where the COVID-19 transmission rate is high, individuals are encouraged to follow the safe practices they have mastered, such as wearing face coverings over the nose and mouth wherever it is not feasible to maintain 6 feet of social distancing from another person not in the same household, but no person may be required to wear a face covering. So if we are to follow the legal recommendation of our council, which is that the law, current state of the law, and the applicable state of the law, unless and until a court says otherwise, is we are required not to mandate masks. I want to recommend that we as a school district follow the full guidance of Governor Abbott and take personal responsibility and do a better job of keeping our kids in those schools, because the ultimate risk, whether we believe that people are at risk of grave medical challenges or just minor ones, we clearly have people who disagree about that. But what we don't disagree on is keeping kids in schools. And everybody who's here and everybody on the board knows what happened yesterday at Armstrong. A classroom was shut down. Everybody knows that there are 85 or 87 students who are new positive cases this week. Those 85 or 87 students have lost their opportunity to have in-person school for the next at least 10 days, and others have as well. Others who are not attending school because of it. For example, the kids at Armstrong who did not test positive. Our common goal as a leadership and as a school district is to keep kids in schools, and so I want to urge.
That I pointed out when Jay requested to include this in our back-to-school safety plan that the caveat is in areas where the COVID-19 transmission rate is high, we are presented with data about Dallas County, but not our specific zip codes. So I requested data about our specific zip codes, 75225 and 75205. I also want to point out that we provided some incorrect information about vaccination rates for age 12 to 17. I think we have a slide for current vaccination rates. In our neighborhood in 75225, I'll give her a minute to pull it up.
I'd like to as the source of the error, would you like for me to report on it? I'm happy to.
I was just going to point out that I believe that 84% of 12 to 17-year-olds in 75225 received at least one first shot. So.
I also want to caveat, can you all talk about how that data was derived so that way people understand? I said I would also, whoever's going to explain it, want to make certain that we understand how that data was derived, because there are some proxies and some really, I believe, excellent just inferences that have had to be made. But I don't want people to think that we somehow are collecting this information. Jay can talk, or Bryce, or whoever's going to talk more about it. Please also talk about where the data is derived from, please.
Yeah, so let me start by saying we have really great news here with newly collected and newly calculated data on vaccination rates. The fantastic news is the new data that came in that was updated with 12 more days worth of data shows us that between the ages of 12 and 17 in the 2 zip codes that feed into our school district, 05 and 25, 916 people in that age group received their first vaccination shot over that 12-day period. The result is, as Bryce mentioned, it says 85, and I don't question the data, whether it's 84 or 85.3 have received at least one dose between the ages of 12 and 17. In addition, 59, almost 60% have completed, which means at that age group, it means they've had 2 shots, because I don't believe Johnson & Johnson, 1 shot is available there. But the other piece that's critical to remind everybody is the other age group, age 0 to 11. We don't need to collect data because we know they're ineligible to receive vaccines. And so 0% of students in our district under the age of 12 have received at least 1 shot, and 0% of those students under the age of 12 are fully vaccinated. As far as the method of calculating, and I'm happy to give it a first crack, but basically the data doesn't break down by ages more specific than 0 to 18. And so Jamie Callahan did a fantastic job of pulling that data and estimating that the age group between 12 and 17 would be 1/3 of the group between 0 and 18, because it's 6 of the 18 different ages. And so the data at the top, where it says 64% and 44.8% is for age groups, it says 10 to 17, right, 10 to 17, thank you. It's complicated. The data that the county published is at the top there. It's from ages 10 to 17, and so it's 8 different ages, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And to reduce it by 1/4 gets you the best estimate of what the vaccination rates are from 12 to 17, knowing that every vaccination in there had to be between 12 and 17 because 11 and below are not eligible. Clear as mud. But the point is, I believe that it's the best and most accurate way to estimate what the vaccination rates are for age 12 to 17 based on data supplied by the county, and of course acknowledging that 75225 and 205 aren't perfectly congruous with our student body or with our population of the school district.
Great point. I mean, it's not a perfect overlap. Geographically, it's a little bit different, and there will be children in that census that aren't in our district. They go to private school or homeschool, whatever. So, any other questions? But Stacey, did he explain what you were looking for?
Yeah, I think the other thing is that it doesn't tell you is that if you look at more granular data that's just from the country, there's almost like an exponential curve where people that are younger are a little bit less likely to get it, and then as they get closer to 18, the numbers go up. But we have no way to get at that data, so we believe that this was the most accurate way to at least try to come up with a proxy measure for the kids that live in those 2 zip codes. And I'll also say, even if they go to a private school, they still live here and they're still part of our community, and so they're in those numbers.
Sure. I'm going to take a stab at a few other things that were brought up either during the public comments or from the prior written comments that I think just to try to bring clarity to some of the decisions that have been made for the benefit of those aspects. So, as always, Dr. Trigg, if I make a mistake, please don't hesitate to chime in. I guess first of all, this is in no particular order, this is just sort of how I wrote my notes down, so forgive me if the order doesn't make sense to you. The first question is, several people have asked, why are we not quarantining close contacts the way we did last year? And the short answer is that during the last school year, TEA gave a temporary authorization for school districts to basically restrict children, make them stay home, even if they were not symptomatic. So let me say it differently. Every other year before last year, if a child was symptomatic, they needed to stay home. If they were not symptomatic, the duty was on the school to educate the child. And this is not official, but this is the way it helps me understand it is. There's 5.5 million children in Texas going to schools, and most of their families rely on schools for child care, and so the schools need to educate the kids unless the kids have symptoms. And so last year, that requirement, which is a state statute, was temporarily lifted. TEA gave school districts across the states the authority to contact trace and then quarantine students. So I just want to let you know, we don't have the ability to quarantine a close contact in this school year the way we did last year. So that'll be not interesting to some of y'all, but it did come through on some of the comments. The other, the same goes for the whole notion of having hybrid.
Excuse me, Tom, not a correction at all, but just a clarification. The rules this year from TEA allow for quarantining voluntarily by parents.
Right.
So where last year it was a requirement that school districts do quarantine based upon, the logistics of the situation. This year we cannot do that, but parents can voluntarily quarantine once they are notified and know that their child was exposed to someone that tested positive for COVID.
Right.
I'm sorry, is it, Dr. Trigger Tom, is there a corollary to that in regards to the fact that unless a child is symptomatic, just like we would with any other contagious disease, a symptomatic child can be and will be sent home, but an asymptomatic child, that's up to their parents. Is that the best way to state that?
Yes, I think so. If the TEA guidance is, if we have a child at school that's symptomatic, and by symptomatic, it doesn't mean they have COVID, but it means they have some of the symptoms that would indicate they might have, then we are required to send them home, and there's a certain reentry requirement. If you go to our back to school plan, that's one of the adjustments that we made so that it was clear that the parents would understand, what our obligations are. So that was one of the changes that Bryce talked about, that we just felt like we needed clarity in the plan for people to understand that.
And we have to notify the whole classes here.
Right, yes. TEA changed their guidance about a week ago to notification of an entire class if you have a positive COVID case within that class. Previously, it basically said notify the entire school. And so now we're doing both. We're sending out, daily notices that there was someone in school, but specific notices if it was in a class. And Brenda, I need you to correct me if I say that. Okay, thumbs up, thank you.
I would say in similar fashion, the opportunity to provide virtual instruction by TEA was a one-year allowance, and that same provision does not carry over to this year. And you guys have already given us a bunch of your time on a Saturday afternoon, so I won't go into that in detail unless the board would like to. The short answer is we don't have the same tools at our disposal with respect to offering virtual instruction or concurrent instruction or live streaming. In fact, depending on the situation, there's actually legislation that specifically prohibits a lot of what we did last year. And again, last year we had a lot of things in place that were in effect just for 1 year, only on a temporary basis. I've answered hybrid. What other questions? We went through 600 some odd comments. What other clarity can we provide that the rest of the trustees think would be helpful for the benefit of the? I'll answer one question that has come up, which is, hey, if the law is very clear and you've got guidance from your attorney that the governor's mandate is in effect, why are we even here? And the short answer is, on Tuesday night. Thank you for your encouragement. On Tuesday night, the situation was not the exact same situation as it was today. We had to make a determination in our efforts to try to do the very best we can for the public. We made a determination the best thing would be call a meeting per regular notification, which is 72 hours. And we also had some, long story short is we thought the very best thing for the public would go ahead and call a meeting with the opportunity to take action if that's what the board thought was appropriate. We also read the papers, we also read the expectations, but we thought the very best thing for the community would be to have the opportunity to come discuss this in front of everybody. I know it's tiresome and tedious, and I apologize for the time y'all had to put into it, but that was a decision we made that we thought was in the best interest of discussing this in a public manner, because it's something that's so important to so many people. So if I misstated that in any way, let me know. Yeah, and the law specifically prohibits us discussing something, really anything, without calling an open meeting and coming and talking about it. And so the short answer is we called the meeting because we thought it might be something we needed to consider. Some things happened between the time the meeting was called and today. And so there's not quite as many things for us to consider, but we determined it was appropriate to go ahead and hold the meeting nonetheless. The truth is, we didn't officially, we got some memos beforehand that are attorney-client privilege, but we didn't really debrief fully with our attorney until the closed session meeting that y'all patiently sat through. I'm sure I'm missing some other key points. Please chime in.
I feel like I wasn't responsive to a comment Bryce made, and I want to share a little more information. Can you put the executive order back up? Bryce made reference.
Ladies and gentlemen, you do not have to stay here, but the time for public comments has passed. Okay? The time for public comments has passed, and so we're gonna let each trustee exercise his or her role as an elected representative. I beg you to respect the trustees the way we respected you when you were speaking.
Thank you, Tom. So Bryce made he pointed out, very importantly, that Governor Abbott's advice is for areas, and these are Governor Abbott's words. Governor Abbott says in areas where the COVID transmission rate is high. So I think it's worth talking a little bit about some of the data that are in the slides that were prepared for today's meeting about transmission rates specifically in our area. One of them, I don't know if it's available, but it's the chart that was shared with us today. This chart that you'll see in a moment, I think each of you received it by email when I did this morning. It shows, I'll go ahead and tell you, which one it is. It shows us that for this first full week of school that went Monday through Friday this week, Highland Park ISD has 87 new cases of positive COVID cases among students, and 27 new cases among staff, not necessarily just teachers, but staff. And to help put that in perspective, we have approximately 700 staff members, and so say again? Over 800, okay, so 820, is that right, Brenda? 800, so 27 out of 800 would be, 5/4 of 27, right, which would be, what would that be? 30?
I think it's between 3 and 4%.
Yeah, right. So, approaching 4%, right? Approaching 4% of staff are new positive cases in the last 5 days. And then, again, looking at students, if we have 87 confirmed positive cases that were confirmed sometime between Monday and Friday, relative to almost 7,000 students in the district, that's about 1.12%. And what the chart also shows above is all of last year, the number of confirmed cases, and you can quickly see that the largest increase in new cases that we had last year was that week in January, and just above it on the week of January 25th, when we had a total of 50 cases, 37 were students, 13 were staff, and so 87 is about almost 2.25 times 37. So one data point, Bryce, is that the first 5 days, and the first full 5-day week we had of school, we more than doubled our worst week from last year in terms of positive cases, and that's only for people that actually tested this week. And then the other slide that I saw that was prepared as well, and was shared with us, I think this one came to us this morning as well. It was the first time I had seen it, but I think it's worth looking at. This one is COVID-19 hospital admissions for Dallas, Tarrant, Collin, and Denton County. And it shows daily admissions as a percentage of the peak. So it's of course, a much broader area. It's those counties, but as far as limiting it to an age population, it's similar to looking at our student population in that it's only people under 18, and on that pink line that shows at the top, somewhere above 160% of where it was at that peak. So to the extent that we need to interpret whether Governor Abbott is talking to us when he says in areas where the COVID-19 transmission rate is high, Governor Abbott's talking to us.
Why doesn't your son wear a mask in school?
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to?
I would like to add one additional thing, please. And that is that For the first time, we did not have this at all last year, we just learned this morning, but we do have a student in the hospital with COVID. And is in serious shape, so people that are shaking their heads back there, I'm just saying it, from the perspective that we've talked, and we heard a lot of people today talking about the fact that the numbers are small, and we all know that, we do, we've looked and we've read everything that you guys have sent to us, but I do think it's important to point out that compared to last year, we actually do have a student that is in the hospital.
We care, yes.
And that's fine, that's very how we feel, but it doesn't feel that way to that student's parent. And I'm asking us to remember that from a neighborhood perspective.
You should not be discussing
Okay,
that.
is there anything else, that would be helpful to clarify?
I'm gonna make a comment here, and I realize that it's not gonna be popular, but I think folks need to understand the way board meetings are organized. There is a specific time for public comments. Once that time is over, then it becomes a meeting of the trustees of the board. And now, please listen to me. It is not a time for the board to engage or interact with the public, or the public to interact with the board. This is the time for the board to talk to one another. And that's what we expect. Hey, that's what we expect. If we continue to have these kinds of interruptions, we have choices to make that we don't want to make. So please respect the process. Allow the board to have their discussions the way the process is set up.
When do you wear your mask?
Mr. Banowski, am I correct in terms of how these meetings are to be conducted?
The public comment section is over, and the board cannot dialogue back and forth with the audience without violating the law. And so you would expect the audience to not throw questions at the board that they can't answer at a time like this. So I don't know how you keep these people from doing this, but it's not proper for any of the trustees to go back and forth. So I just suggest you stick to what you're doing.
Dr. Trigg, I'd make a suggestion that I'll just tell the board, but there are plenty of people who may also hear it. We're all available to talk with people outside of open session. And everybody in our community, we encourage them, and I'm telling you all, and maybe you all and I can all communicate this with our community, but we are available to communicate with people. But right now we're in a session where we're trying to have an official conversation and meeting with each other.
I think it will just be
I appreciate
helpful.
that, Jay. I think that's a great reminder. Go ahead, Mary Jane.
I'm just saying, I think it'll just be helpful if internally we're looking at each other and directing our questions and comments to each other. And so I think if we could just move forward like that, that will help move us along.
Agreed.
I do have a question real quick. There was a question raised about the fact that there is virtual instruction happening for the class of Armstrong, but you're not offering it otherwise. That came up here in the comments, so if you all can comment on that, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean,
Meeting sessions. I'm sorry, there's an interruption over here that I thought we should pause discussion, but now we're done.
okay. Yes, we've actually prepared some information to share with you all trustees about the different types of at-home instruction that we have. So Tammy, if you could bring those up. I know that was a late addition today. I'm actually going to have Lisa Wilson go through these slides because one, she put them together, and two, she's in charge of all this process. So,
Dr. Trigg, just briefly before Lisa does that, back to that slide where we were looking at data on 4 different counties. I encouraged Jay and the members of the PRC on Friday that we need to focus on our community, this distinct community with high vaccination rates, and that should be our guiding principles in the PRC. And that's the last thing I want to say on that front.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Confirm, I agree, and I think the Highland Park data we showed is, you're right, it's more important.
So, Lisa?
All right, well, we have, as you all know, our guidance tends to come and can change on a dime, and so we are doing our very best to try to ensure
are responsive and providing education for all of the students in Highland Park. So there are some attendance scenarios that have been causing confusion. So Tammy, if you'll click, there are actually 3 distinct absence reasons or situations that are unusual for the school year. These are ways that we are reporting students in Skyward. So let me talk about the first one. We do have guidance that if a student needs to remain home due to either a confirmed case of COVID or if the parents choose to keep them at home due to an exposure for COVID, those students are marked as absence and excused, and it is marked for those parents who will see that in Skyward. They'll see a mark of Q. Quite frankly, we're just running out of letters, so that's the letter that we chose for that one. A second scenario are those students whose families have opted to engage in the parent-led temporary at-home learning option. And of course, we could talk for quite some time about how that option came about, but we're following the TEA guidance that we have. Again, for those students, we have to mark them absent because we are not allowed to confirm them as present because that's not recognized by TEA at this time. So although we are marking them absent, it is an excused absence, and we are using a code of W, so it is clear to us when we're reviewing the records that those students were still learning at home through that parent-led option. Finally, if we have a scenario like the one we unfortunately had at Armstrong, where it made more sense, we had more students at home than we had in the classroom at the time, that we would close the classroom and continue to provide synchronous instruction to those students. So for those students, we are allowed to call them present because they all qualify under something called remote conferencing. And again, TEA has specific guidance on remote conferencing, what can and cannot be allowable. And so for those students who are in the situation of an emergency closure, and the teacher no longer has students in person, and I think that's an important distinction because we are not allowed to have a teacher teaching both virtual students and in-person students at the same time. But if that teacher no longer has students in the classroom but can then switch to 100% synchronous asynchronous activities and engage with those students throughout the day, we are able to call them present with a code of K. And so that's kind of what that looks like. So if you'll quickly, Tammy, it's probably more information than you wanted. But again, those students who are home with COVID-related issues, those are students one of 2 ways, either positive or choosing to stay home due to the exposure. That's the absence code. TEA is limiting that to 20 days in a school year. We do not receive funding. We could receive funding if we engaged in remote conferencing for those students, but quite frankly, when those teachers are still teaching in-person learners, we simply don't have extra staff sitting around to provide that synchronous instruction. So we just receive no state funding for them. We do, however, try to provide assignments for those students, and those teachers will support those students transitioning back to class. And if you'll click one more time, Tammy, I think there's one more bullet. We have designated a campus COVID learning coordinator to try to communicate with families, just to try to help. We know this is a very frustrating time, whether it's a confirmed case or an exposure. We know that this is very disruptive, and we're trying to increase the line of communication. On the next slide, again, so just a few more details about parent and temporary at-home learning. These are parents who have opted to keep their students home. Again, it's absent with a code of W. It's parent-led. We are doing our best as a team to support those questions. There's really not anyone, it's not really anyone's full-time job, but we're certainly doing the best we can. Those students may return in person at any time. They're still rostered. They still have a classroom teacher, and so they can receive at any time, or they can return at any time. Again, we receive no state funding for these students. Of course, as things change, there is legislative action that could change that in the next few weeks. Finally, the third group of students, again, for details, is the emergency closure. Again, the distinction there is when we no longer have students in the classroom and that teacher is able to switch to 100% virtual and meet with all of their students. We are able to pull funding for up to 20 days for what's called remote conferencing. There are requirements for the number of hours between kinder and grade 5. It's one set of requirements, and 6th grade then and up would be another set. But that's how we are working on those. And then finally, on the last slide, just because everything is about as I think Jay used, as clear as mud, we tried to provide some clarity in the differences there in the 3 learning, the kind of the 3 scenarios that we're trying to help our staff and our families kind of understand.
Thank you, Lisa. I think it's the biggest takeaway for me is that we no longer can allow a teacher to both simultaneously teach kids in the classroom and also kids at home at the same time.
That's correct, and there was a question, why don't we just put a camera on and let them just hear the lesson, and it's very clear from TEA that's not an acceptable for synchronous interaction.
Am I right in thinking that was specific legislation that was specifically stated as a result of looking at data statewide from the challenges imposed by dual mode instruction, or did I?
I believe there was legislation proposed. I don't know that it officially passed. That where we are getting it is through the guidance on what we can count for
From
funding
TEA.
and not
Okay.
fund. And I do believe there was a lot of discussion about the quality of virtual versus.
So maybe that's part of the proposed legislation that then got interrupted when there was a recess.
I believe so.
Lisa, how many students so far have chosen W as their?
As of yesterday, we had 22 for a variety of grades from K through 6.
And Lisa, I may have missed, is there active legislation that may affect the funding or support as it relates to virtual learning?
I believe there is some being discussed. I apologize, I don't know the exact bill number, but yes, there is discussion of whether or not virtual learning should be on the plate for funding.
That is correct. The first special session did not include discussion of virtual learning in the governor's list of acceptable topics, but the second special session does include that, and there have been a hearing in both Senate Ed and House Ed, and I believe both of those bills have been passed on to the full House and full Senate to be debated. So there's a very good chance that there will be some changes. Quite frankly, I'm not sure exactly how those changes will impact us, and we'll just have to work through them as they happen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one other question which I just thought of. You said there were 22 families that have chosen to date the parent-led option.
There are 22 students.
22 students. Is that window still open?
We actually closed the window so that we could provision all of the accounts for those students who are participating. But if we have families who need to contact us and visit with us, we can do that. We had a certain deadline that we had to hit to get all of the technology behind the scenes.
But if there's a student's family that views the situation differently next week,
They
they
can
could
contact
still
us.
have an opportunity to contact and see what accommodations can be.
available.
All right, thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions, or I know last time we gave some direction to the PRC, the things we wanted them to work on. I know some of those were incorporated, some of them were ongoing, as Bryce, you and Jay shared. Part of why we call this is so that we can discuss any ideas or anything that should be considered. I think there was a discussion last time that I thought was healthy, and I still believe is accurate, that there's benefit to letting the administration have the flexibility to make changes along the way as conditions change. I think we've come to the conclusion that any change related to mask policy would not be one that would be made directly by the administration, but if there was a change related to some other, I would say, less contentious aspect of protocols compared to what we had last year, then I I personally think there still remains benefit in letting the administration have the flexibility to be more nimble. But if anybody disagrees with that, this is the time to talk about that.
And I'll just state my understanding of the role of PRC, and that is in a true advisory capability to Dr. Trigg to use as he sees fit on input on issues that are critical, issues that he may want different perspectives, but he's in no way held to use that for every decision that he makes. He does not have to run by the PRC.
That's accurate. And over the last year and a half, I would say there are certain times when there were decisions that need to be made more quickly, and it was some subset of PRC, and maybe their decisions only affect the high school, so there's no need to gather, for instance, all the elementary schools.
Such as the Armstrong situation that happened this week, was
Right.
the decision.
Correct. It did not
Actually was not run by the PRC, it was a decision made by the administration.
with a subset of notice to a subset of the PRC.
And is there, and I know Bryce mentioned that the PRC was in discussion of addition of medical expertise to the committee. Can we expound on that at all in terms of how the committee is potentially looking at that? Who might be, are they looking at one voice, three voices? Are they looking at different areas of expertise? Is there any additional information on that? It's been 2 weeks since we talked, and so I would be curious where we are.
So at the last Friday's PRC meeting, Dr. Trigg delegated the responsibility of selecting the physicians to myself, Jay, and John DeLander. So that was a week ago yesterday. We met for the first time on Thursday, met again on Friday. We're still in discussions about that, and frankly haven't come to conclusions about number of doctors or type of doctors, so I think it would be premature to comment on that. I think Jay and I are going to talk about it after the meeting. I do want to comment on the mask issue coming before the entire board. I do think as a member of the PRC that particular issue should not be decided by an advisory group behind closed doors with sort of nebulous guidelines. I think the board should vote on it. And so. Any other issue that's a matter of significance to our community, I think the full board, we should have the PRC, as a member of the PRC, as a parent, as a trustee, you know, I acknowledge, based on the conversation with Dr. Trigg, that we have the right to bring that before the full board.
I would wholeheartedly agree.
And let me expand on what Bryce said. For good or for bad, we're unlikely to have the politicians either in Austin or Dallas give us discretion to make decisions about masks. And so the one clarification is, to the extent that following the law, which we all have continued to do, declared that it's important, to the extent that the law changes, I don't know that if it's conclusive and advice of counsel says otherwise, I don't know that it necessarily requires a vote of the board as opposed to the superintendent following the law, which we all want.
I think, Jay, I think that there would be a lot of parameters we'd have to work through if, let's just say hypothetically, I don't want to put our teachers in a position where we have any chance of confusion about how that a shift in that might be handled.
Understood. And so my suggestion to all of us would be, if we find ourselves in a position where the law is clear and we're out of compliance, that at the very least we use our authority to call an emergency meeting and expedite it as quickly as possible for that purpose.
Go ahead.
Well, if the situation meets statute, you can call an emergency meeting. Just my 2 cents on what's going to happen and what will happen is, if the Supreme Court does certain with regard to mask mandates, and if the Supreme Court does something that would allow local districts to adopt, or would simply say the county order is in effect, what that means and what you can do is open for debate.
And I think we're all saying the same thing. I'm not suggesting that we move before advice of counsel.
I'm not saying give me some time to formulate that advice.
And I would ask that as
I acknowledge it may take time.
as leaders of how much of that scenario planning preparation for scenario 2, how much of that can be done in advance? I mean, shouldn't we have a couple of different plans, and if something changes, we have the ability to pull this one and go? Or how much of it can be done in advance? Just for safety's sake, in case, so we're not caught flat-footed if something unexpected were to happen.
Certainly. No, I would agree, and even though we would speculate that the chance that the Supreme Court was going to change and come out with something different, that we should have some things ready to go. We have begun those discussions internally, administratively. You all have not been apprised of that, but we have looked at and had some beginning discussions about what other districts have done in terms of examples, for example, compliance, you know, how we would administer that kind of thing. I don't know that, I think we would be ready with some recommendations if that were to happen.
I'll move to adjourn.
Before that motion, I want to ask, I think it's clear, whether you were asking about specific questions about Lisa's presentation or other discussion for this meeting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Lisa, I thought you went through everything very, very well, and I just want to reiterate that clarifying question I had about the inability to do dual mode. It worked, honestly, here's the problem. It worked really, really well last year because our teachers absolutely bent over backwards and plowed through all year long doing it. It was very disruptive, it was very difficult, it was very exhaustive, and candidly, across the state, it did not go nearly as well as it went within our district. That's largely, has a lot to do with the fact that we have very involved parents who are helping out as well. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with that, because we have a lot of families who have the means and the motivation to help their kids' education, and so they showed up in droves last year, and so we saw small pullbacks, but they were maybe single digit, whereas across the state they saw 30–50% drops in relative test scores. And so, again, maybe I'm belaboring a point that's not as important to people as I think it is, but on one hand, we did it really, really well last year because of great effort by leaders and teachers and students and parents, and we're unique in that ability across the state. And so we just don't have as many tools at our disposal this year, even though it would be nice if we did. So, did that summarize, Jay?
It did, but before we entertain the motion to dismiss, one other suggestion on our common goal of keeping our kids in person and in schools. When we talk about the political battle that's going on between Austin and our county, in Austin with the governor and with the county judge from our county, I think it's important to keep in mind that although we all agree that the current state of the law is that schools are forbidden from requiring masks, the governor has no such check on the county judge if he wants to shut down our schools because we have too many COVID cases. And so that's why I encourage our community to do everything we can to keep the COVID cases down, because the governor can't save us from L.A. Jenkins shutting down the schools.
I think the point we're making is that maybe you want to elaborate, Bill?
The law allows the county health authorities to shut down a school in the event of a epidemic breakout. They have that authority to do that. The debate last year was whether they had the authority to shut down all the schools at the same time, and there's a question about that. But if there was a significant outbreak at a single school, just like if we had measles or intestinal
Or stomach
viruses, whatever, there's a list where they could shut down a particular school, but that's the authority they have.
But the metrics for that are not well defined. Is that true?
I've never looked at it. I don't think there's any metrics for it because of the number of different diseases that could trigger a shutdown, and you would have to consider the opinions of experts as to how rapid the contagion can spread, whether it will spread, how significant the symptoms are, and whether you can just get everybody away from the school for 3 days, it'll all be over and you can all come back. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into a decision that the county health department would have to make in determining whether to shut down the school and how long to keep it shut down.
I have one other comment or question, and that is for the people that are on the PRC. For the people that are on the PRC, so Bryce and Jay, and of course our administration that's there, you know, mitigation strategies to me are sort of like Swiss cheese. There's no end all to be all with any one of them. But, you know, as you layer them up, some of the holes are gone. So I'm just assuming, based on everything that's happened thus far, that you're continuing to look at other mitigation strategies that aren't related to this, that can help, where it also is congruent with the quality of education and the other things that are important in class. I mean, at the end of the day, we want kids in class learning, and we need to have our teachers, not necessarily subs, that are teaching them. And so I just want to make certain that, you know, the whole plethora of things within the context of the law are being reviewed.
The answer to that is yes. At the last meeting, we went through each and every one of the protocols in the back-to-school plan, talked about them, and I anticipate that we will do that at the next meeting as well with the new data that we have.
And Stacy, to expound, you're right. We need kids in schools with their teachers teaching. The next best thing is kids in schools with substitute teachers teaching. And it was brought to my attention yesterday, and I confirmed with Brenda today, that at the high school yesterday, we needed 15 more substitutes in order to have an adult leading every class of students. And district-wide, 50% of the substitutes we needed were unfilled yesterday. Or, I'm sorry, it's either 48% or 52%, I'm not sure which, but it's very close to 50.
All right. One last time, anybody else have anything that they want to discuss
I'm gonna hold off.
on this matter only? All right, well, Bryce, second Bryce's motion. Bryce, would you like to make a motion again?
Yeah, I will re-urge my motion to adjourn the meeting.
And I will reiterate my second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time.